dozens of families that rely on income from Infinicept, and dozens of people who spend a good chunk of their waking life thinking about how to move Infinicept forward. So they're first on my mind.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Transparency is one of those words that a lot of people think they have in their organization and their culture. But when you really start talking about it, there's a lot of secrets going on. The more secrets you have, the less transparent you actually are as an organization. And when you have a transparency line that kind of errs toward there's a lot of secrets, then you don't have the kind of ownership and the feeling across the culture that is necessary for you to continue growing. I truly believe this because I talk to a lot of founder CEOs around the importance of transparency, what that means. I've shared about this on stages where I give keynotes to different organizations to help them understand how to make culture a competitive advantage. But when you think about your transparency inside your organization, it's not just about sharing the financials. It's about sharing other aspects too, and about really being candid with each other where necessary. When you think about moving to the next level, I want you to think about transparency and where your transparency line is. My guest today is the co-CEO, Todd Ablowitz. He is the company they have is Infinicept. They were number 95 on the Inc. list, over 3,600% growth rate in the last 3 years, 40 employees. I give you the stats because I want you to understand the level of this company. They're not too big, but they're not tiny. But they believe transparency has been one of the critical factors that has aligned them together and also connected them through tough times like COVID, but also through other things that they have to get done. Growing fast is not easy. When you run a fast growth company, we put in there some of the details about what transparency looks like, where that line is, and what is allowed to be transparent and what is something you still hold back. Well, all that inside this episode and more. When you are a leader pushing to the next level, sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes you feel like your team needs to step up. You're spinning a lot of plates. I totally get it. But when you think about your own leadership and you want to go to the next level, maybe it's time to talk to an executive coach. My name is Gene Hammett. I work with founders, CEOs of companies that want to grow fast, align together their teams, and it takes a different style of leadership to make that happen. If you're open for a conversation, make sure you reach out to me. Go to genehammett.com. There's some resources I have there for you. But you can check out what I'm stand for. And if it's a good fit, I'd love to hear from you. Now, here's the interview with Todd. Todd, how are you?
Doing great.
Excited to have you here on Growth Think Tank to talk about growth, culture, and fast growth leadership. I'd love for you to let us know a little bit more about Infinicept.
Infinicept is a software company with consulting as well that helps payments go your way. And what that means is lots of software companies out there are adding payments into what they offer. So if you think of the software that runs a restaurant, everyone goes to a restaurant, everyone pays at a restaurant. It used to be that restaurant would get their payment services from a bank or from a processor. And very often now the restaurants get the payment services from the software company that runs their point of sale. So those point of sale companies are our customers. We help get payments going their way.
Well, I appreciate you giving us that context. You made the Inc. list this past year. Number 95 is pretty impressive, over 3,000% growth rate in 3 years. What was the first feeling you had when you reached that level of growth?
Awe for the incredible team members of the company, the customers who got us there. We don't get that growth without customers, and our shareholders who participated in helping us be in a position to have happy customers with all that growth.
Well, you had mentioned the team members first. Is that because the team members are such a critical part of scaling a company to this pace?
By far the most important part. We like to think in those three buckets: the team members, the customers, and the shareholders. But we have dozens of families that rely on income from Infinicept, and dozens of people who spend a good chunk of their waking life thinking about how to move Infinicept forward. So they're first on my mind.
So about 40 employees. One of the things that you have done from a leadership and culture standpoint is you have really focused on a certain aspect of that, which is transparency. Why is transparency so important for the growth of your company?
Well, the first thing is we should talk about our core values. If you want to understand where transparency comes from, it comes from our core values. And we have 5 core values that every employee knows and could answer at any time. Do the right thing, be excellent because perfect is impossible, have integrity, act like an adult, and eat and drink well. And the reason in the concept here of transparency, it permeates many of those things. Obviously, without transparency, you cannot have integrity. You can't be honest if you're not transparent. But when we talk about be excellent, but perfect is impossible, if your goal is perfection, you're very likely not to be transparent with your weaknesses, not to be transparent with the errors you make. So transparency, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this, but it has permeated so many aspects of our company and really become who we are.
Now, hold on for a second. Todd just mentioned his core values and how important they are to the organization as a whole. When you think about your core values, is this something that you have talked about in the past, or is it something that comes up every day? Well, the organizations that have a ritual around their core values that they're discussed every day, people are recognized for it. There's rituals that allow them to truly experience what it's like to live the values. They actually perform at a higher level from what I've seen. When you think about your core values, it really is something to guide employees to make decisions when you're not in the room. You want to make sure that they know what's expected of them. This is one way to reinforce that, and you want to do it over and over again. You want to be consistent about that. There's many different techniques I've shared in this. Check out some of the solo episodes on the podcast. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe to don't miss an episode of Growth Think Tank. Now back to Todd. So how would you define where you draw the line on your transparency?
There are things that aren't helpful. It's not helpful to talk to one employee about another employee's performance review. That's not appropriate or helpful. There are things that are not prudent to talk about, but the line should be, if it was printed in the New York Times, would you be just fine with it being there and be proud of the way you acted in all aspects?
Do you share a full perspective of the financials across the company?
Full. I mean, our board meetings have dozens and dozens and dozens of pages, but every employee, every shareholder knows where we stand, knows the key metrics of where we need to go, knows what the ingredients are to get us there and how they can help doing that. So I would say, I think to what you're really asking, the answer is yes.
And do you also have the kind of transparency across leadership where feedback is welcomed, whether it be from a junior person to a senior person, across different ranks, the kind of conversations you have, is that the kind of transparency that you kind of have and really want to have inside your culture?
It's essential to have that level of transparency, and there has to be a vulnerability. If you're going for excellence, you have to recognize you're not perfect. That means you have to be a little bit vulnerable and listen to the feedback from wherever it comes. We have done 360s. I have a co-founder and co-CEO who has equal ownership and equal control of the company. I run demand, all things that create demand, and she runs fulfillment, all things that fulfill that demand. And so we did 360s on ourselves and took it incredibly seriously. And we do the same thing up and down the organization. The feedback is welcome. We do all hands, we do skip levels, and we really encourage everyone to listen to what people are saying. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to be right, but you have to take those ingredients and incorporate it in every aspect, not just employees, but customers, shareholders, board meetings, et cetera.
Todd, you mentioned skip level meetings. Maybe not everyone knows what that is. Can you share with us how that works for you?
That would be when a manager meets with someone who reports to one of their direct reports. So that would skipping the level of the manager, not in any onerous way, just as something that's healthy. It's or management by walking around, just sitting down next to, in COVID times, it's not sitting down maybe, but sitting down next to an engineer or a support dev and just having a chat. Half the time it's personal and how are things going in your job?
A lot of people in corporate America have resisted that because it's going over their head. I never really understood it until I understood the seriousness of the politics within corporate America. But politics and the size of company you have, just there's no place for that kind of politics. Is that fair to say?
I think every company has politics. Politics is the study of how humans interact with one another. And there's probably a better scientific description, but there's always politics. The point is it benign or is it harming the organization?
Yeah.
Understanding human dynamics, you can't expect people not to have feelings. You can't expect people not to have coalitions. And frankly, there's a lot that's good about that. It's good for people to have the meeting before the meeting. It's good to prepare people and not surprise them or gang up in some way. But the politics of large organizations, when it becomes more important than the core business, that can be a problem. Not every organization has it to that degree, but I've certainly seen it many, many times. But I caution small or fast-growing companies to think they don't have it because it's there. And what I would encourage is the openness. If you're doing a skip level, that is not to get a gotcha on a manager, and it's not a secret. It's not a secret that it's happening, and the content that's shared shouldn't be a secret, and nobody should be afraid of that. It should just be part of the conversation process.
I agree. One of the things I want to ask you about this transparency, what would we see across your organization if we witness the kind of transparency that really has helped you guys grow?
The best example I would give is when we started into March, we were raising money. And I think we finalized our plan on March 7th after our February 20th board meeting. And everything shut down on March 15th. And we had to continue to execute our plan during the very worst and scariest times of COVID. And so when we did that, we did the scenarios of if it was bad and if it was really bad, what would we do? And we identified that we didn't have to do layoffs. We needed to moderate our expectations, and we needed to hit certain objectives. We had to raise the money. We had to do a certain amount with how much sales we would get. We had to do a certain amount of being conservative with our cash. And so we got everyone together and we told them exactly what that was. This is what we need to do. Here are the 3 things that we have to accomplish. And we'll keep updating you every couple of weeks or months on how we're doing toward. And every single person in the company knew what we had to do. They knew how much we had to raise. They knew what those milestones needed to be. They knew what we had to do in terms of getting our customers, keeping our customers, not losing. We thought we might lose some customers. We didn't actually, but we thought we might. And the punchline is that during March, April, and May, although we had one engineer who got very, very sick and was on a respirator, it felt like the whole company was in the hospital at that time. But the fact is the team came together. Everyone talked about what was going on. Everyone knew what the objectives were. We didn't lay off a single person. And we are in a position now where we're growing again. We had, I don't even know how many, maybe 10 new hires that we're in the midst of.
One of the things I wanted to go into that is, COVID had some specific challenges around culture, and many of those kind of transparency is a little bit harder because you're not having as many meetings, you're not having as many impromptu kind of experiences with people. How did you guys keep this kind of transparency going through the shutdown, if you will?
We answered the questions. We encouraged the question. We talked to the managers. We encouraged the managers to talk to their people. We were taking one-on-one conversations. We were calming fears and answering questions, and also saying that we don't have control of this. There are things completely out of our control, and we don't know what the future will hold. Here's the best information we have at this time, and we know what we know. And we know that we can do A, B, and C over the next 30 days, the next 60 days. If that changes, you'll be the first to know.
Now, Todd just said something about answering the question. One of the things that you can do to really connect yourself to others is open yourself up to questions and not limit it. A lot of leaders want the questions to be focused, or they want them to be submitted in advance. You want the kind of transparency that allows people to ask difficult questions and even encourage them to ask difficult questions. If you have to have some people that will get the ball rolling to ask those difficult questions, you want to make sure that some of the issues that are kind of running around the company that you want to get out of ahead of is someone asks those questions. Answering questions of your employees may sound like something that, of course everyone does this, but do you take time to actually do this in a way that moves the company forward? Is what you're doing working? If you don't have the right answer to that, you're not getting what you really want out of it. Then make sure you look at yourself and say, what needs to change? How do we need to operate this in a way that makes this beneficial to everyone? Back to Todd. Love that. I think a lot of leaders are so busy with the work, and they're so busy with the projects and the clients and the milestones and raising money and sales and all that stuff that they rarely take the time to lead. But what you're describing to me, Todd, is leading the people has been a very central part of why you guys are where you are from a growth standpoint. Is that fair?
Gene, I'm a little uncomfortable only in that it's always a journey. We have to do the plate spinning that every entrepreneur has to do. We've had several eras. We had the era where my co-founder and I each had solo consulting companies originally. And then we had the era where we came together, and then we had an assistant. And then one day we had enough people that people were getting confused about what other people were doing. And we had to knock some heads together and be like, we need to have some meetings. I know you hate meetings, but we need to have some meetings to be coordinated. And we then had the era of going from 8 people to 40 people in a year, and the chaos that goes along with that. So we have every bit of the plate spinning and every bit of the failures of leadership that you have when you're spinning all those plates, but we care about it. And we have the intention of making it happen. And despite the times that we get it wrong, I do think we get it right a fair.
Before we go much further, I wanted to remind you that we have a YouTube channel. If you want to go to genehammett.com/YouTube, you can get some videos that we only put on YouTube. We are growing that channel over there. You can find some of the interviews. You can find a lot of the solo episodes, but you can find some content that you won't find anywhere else just by going to genehammett.com/YouTube. Make sure you do that now. Well, I can appreciate your honesty there. We're all plate spinning around this thing to grow a business to the pace you have. When we talk about leadership and culture, we've been talking about transparency so much. Is there anything else that you would kind of chime in on as being something that moved the needle for you guys?
You can't pretend you care. If they don't care, either they certainly they wouldn't belong in our culture. But there has to be a genuine desire. If you can't put on a culture of transparency and also be a command and control, kind of heartless leadership. There are companies like that, and some people thrive in just numbers basis. I saw one of the famous, I forget which one of the famous speakers, at a conference 15 or 20 years ago, and he talked about there being, a few types of leaders. There's visionary leaders, there's people leaders, and there's numbers leaders. And I'd like to strive for somewhere, certainly people and ideally some visionary things. But if it's purely a numbers leader and that is the DNA of your organization, don't try to put lipstick on it. You can tell from my language, I don't really agree with it, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Some organizations or some industries might thrive with that. I would just encourage, with transparency comes the honest intention of you got to mean it. People see right through it. People will tell if you're phoning it in, or that's the first thing. The second thing I think I'm going to add to it is I would really encourage other business leaders to listen to their teams. If their teams are often younger, especially in fast-growing companies, it tends to attract a younger demographic. Listen to what the youngest in your company and the coalitions, or what people are talking about socially, because it's incredibly important that they're going to be the leadership of the country, of the world in a number of years, and feeding into it, but also learning from them. And the great example is the Black Lives Matter movement, And it's not to get your podcast political, but we had to listen to our team, and we wanted to listen. We were very transparent about our feelings when these things started to come up. And we had an all-team meeting and got every single employee who wanted to be involved in the discussion involved.
Love that. It was a very difficult time. COVID, on top of COVID, was the Black Lives Matter. And I think all of us leaders, the biggest thing we could have done was listen. And so the fact that you wanted to do that, it goes back to number one. You can't pretend you care, because that wouldn't have gone off well if you were just pretending to just put it together.
Well, I would say that first of all, I would gently correct that it's not in the past tense. I think it's present tense, that we have to be thinking about this every day. And we're two white men having a mantle talking about this, and that's okay because there's only two people here. But the reality is that we have to think about how can we be proactive? How can we? It's not just making sure panels have the right demographics on it. It's not just putting an EEOC line at the bottom of your job postings. We've got to be proactive in going and looking for diverse experiences and views, because you have a better company if you do it. And I'd like to say, Gene, we are not succeeding there yet. We have a giant amount of work to do, and we're asking for help from everywhere we can get it, from colleagues and friends, and from consultants, and from job boards, and from nonprofits, everywhere we can to try and improve our equity, inclusion, and diversity.
Totally agree with you, Todd. Thanks for being here to share your wisdom about leadership and really talking about transparency. I appreciate it. So this wraps up another great episode of the podcast. I just want to remind you that the topics we talked about today are to be really considered, and for you to take time to think about transparency, what that means. Where do you draw the line? Listening to leaders like Todd talk about what really matters is a part of your own growth, and taking the time to act on it is a part of that too. One of the things I do as an executive coach working with founders, CEOs, is helping them see the blind spots, helping them go beyond where they are today. If you have any questions about that, make sure you reach out to me. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.